Because most people, very, very understandably, have been fixated on the tariff situation and the economic uncertainty that the tariff situation has created, well, you had a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that flew completely under the radar. You see, just earlier this week, on Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court officially allowed the Trump administration to continue deporting Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act, effectively reversing that restraining order that was placed against them several weeks ago. Let's go through the details of what this all means together, and I will quickly mention right off the bat that as Trump is trying to deport roughly 2 million people, I'm out here trying to import 2 million people to our YouTube subscriber list. And so if you happen to be one of the 42% of people who watch our videos without having yet subscribed, well, I do hope you change that by smashing that subscribe button. That way, every single time we publish a new episode, you won't even have to go out there looking for it. You won't even have to type in any search terms. It'll just be right there in your newsfeed. Perfect. You won't have to look for it. You'll just be informed without having to do anything except smashing that subscribe button right now, which I hope you do. Now, getting back to the Supreme Court ruling, to start with, at the beginning of Trump's second term in office, he invoked something called the Alien Enemies Act. Signed into law all the way back in the year 1798, it allows the sitting president of the United States to deport anyone in the country who is not an American citizen if that person happens to be from a country with which there is a declared war or there is a threatened or attempted invasion or predatory incursion. Now, once invoking that particular law, the Trump administration did the following. They had the State Department designate the Tren de Aragua gang as an actual foreign terrorist organization. Then, the Trump administration made the argument that the Venezuelan government effectively gives marching orders to Venezuelan gangs who then cross the U.S. southern border, and therefore, what's actually happening at the border is a state-sponsored predatory incursion, which is exactly the prerequisite for the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. Then, using this pretext, the Trump administration began rounding up the illegal aliens from Venezuela and sending them on flights, either back to their home country or to the large detention center that was recently built over in El Salvador. Quote, Trump's invocation of the centuries-old Alien Enemies Act said that Tren de Aragua has invaded the United States and continues to invade, attempt to invade, and threaten to invade the country. It authorized officials to immediately apprehend, detain, and remove all Tren de Aragua members in the United States who are older than 13 years of age and who are not naturalized or lawful permanent residents. However, several of the Venezuelan deportees filed a lawsuit against the administration and were able to get a federal judge to issue a restraining order. Quote, lawyers for the Venezuelans told U.S. District Judge James Boasberg in the lawsuit that the Alien Enemies Act was improperly being used against nationals of a country, Venezuela, with whom the United States is not at war, which is not invading the United States, and which has not launched a predatory incursion into the United States. Judge Boasberg sided with the plaintiffs, entering restraining orders within hours and later keeping the orders in place. With those restraining orders in place, the Trump administration had effectively their hands tied in regards to deporting these alleged Venezuelan gang members. And the plaintiffs in the case, which included a group of Venezuelan nationals, well, they welcomed the court's decision, saying that the restraining order that was filed by the judge, quote, ensures that, based on an unprecedented peacetime invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, additional individuals are not hurried off to a brutal foreign prison, potentially for the rest of their lives, without judicial process. However, the Trump administration, they immediately filed an appeal against the restraining order, but they lost that appeal, which effectively blocked them from being able to run deportation flights. And so the administration, they filed another emergency appeal all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, hoping that the highest court will overturn these restraining orders. Included among the briefings that were submitted to the court, you had the U.S. Solicitor General, representing the Trump administration, put the case in the following terms, sort of to make the constitutional argument for why this case is so important. Quote, this case presents fundamental questions about who decides how to conduct sensitive national security-related operations in this country, the president through Article 2 or the judiciary through temporary restraining orders. And within just a single week, which is very fast for the U.S. Supreme Court, the court sided with the administration. On Monday of this week, in an unsigned opinion, the U.S. Supreme Court granted President Trump's request by writing the following, quote, we grant the application and vacate the temporary restraining orders. This decision, it applies to 2 of the original restraining orders as well as the extension that was issued last month by Judge Boasberg, meaning it's a practical matter that all the restraining orders have now been wiped off the table. Although it is worth mentioning that the reason that the majority of the U.S. Supreme Court sided with President Trump was actually due to a technical reason. The justices wrote that the case was wrongly filed in Washington, D.C., rather than in the Southern District of Texas, where the illegal immigrants are currently being held. And for your reference, this type of a practice is known as forum shopping, where plaintiffs look to file their case in a district that they believe will be more amenable to their cause. And so in this case, instead of filing in Texas, where they were being held, the Venezuelans filed their petition in Washington, D.C. Judge James Boasberg is the chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, and he's the one who issued the restraining orders against the Trump administration. However, the Supreme Court said that this makes no sense. Quote, "The detainees are confined in Texas, so venue is improper in the District of Columbia. As a result, the government is likely to succeed on the merits of this action. The detainees must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal under the Act. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in the proper venue before such removal occurs." Which is a bit ironic because the plaintiffs likely decided to file in Washington, D.C. in order to increase their likelihood of getting a judge who would issue a restraining order. They succeeded at that. However, because they filed in a district that had nothing to do with them, that turned out to be their undoing, since the U.S. Supreme Court just stated in this opinion that the case will likely get thrown out on technical grounds. They're not even looking at whether the Alien Enemies Act was properly applied or not. That is not even relevant here. They're just basing their decision on the technical jurisdictional grounds. And so essentially what appears to have happened is that the plaintiffs tried to take a bit of a shortcut, but that wound up costing them in the end. Now, as you would imagine, the Trump administration themselves were quite satisfied with this turn of events. For instance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, she released the following statement after this Supreme Court decision came out. Quote, "Tonight's decision is a landmark victory for the rule of law. An activist judge in Washington, D.C. does not have the jurisdiction to seize control of President Trump's authority to conduct foreign policy and keep the American people safe. The Department of Justice will continue fighting in court to make America safe again." Likewise, you had Trump himself take to his own social media platform, Truth Social, to say the following. "The Supreme Court has upheld the rule of law in our nation by allowing a president, whoever that may be, to be able to secure our borders and protect our families and our country itself. A great day for justice in America." Now, in terms of the next steps, Judge Boasberg, citing the U.S. Supreme Court decision, he canceled a hearing that was scheduled for this Tuesday in Washington, D.C. In the order that he issued canceling the meeting, he wrote the following about the next steps. Quote, "In yesterday's ruling, vacating this court's temporary restraining orders, the Supreme Court held that plaintiffs cannot be deported under the Alien Enemies Act without an opportunity to challenge their removal in federal court. It also determined that the appropriate venue for such proceedings is the Southern District of Texas or wherever plaintiffs are currently held. This court accordingly orders that today's preliminary injunction hearing is vacated." Now, as of right now, the plaintiffs have not refiled their case in the Southern District of Texas or anywhere else, but given their predicament, they likely will in the very near future. And once they do, we'll just have to see how the judge handles that case. Whether or not he or she, whether they're in Texas or anywhere else, will also file an emergency restraining order handcuffing the administration. We'll just have to wait and see. Until then, if you'd like to go deeper into the story, I will throw both the Supreme Court ruling as well as the dissenting opinions, which are also kind of interesting to read. I'll throw all those down into the description box below if you're the type of person that likes to dig into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, smash that like button so that this video can reach ever more people. And also, of course, smash that subscribe button so that you can get informed of any new videos as soon as we publish them. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.